What time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening from? Leave a comment below. And if this kind of quiet, immersive history helps you relax, don't forget to subscribe for more calm storytelling every week. Now, let's begin with the quiet coins of Constantine. Asterisk. You open your mind's eye to a chill spring sunrise in Naxos, a provincial town tucked amid the limestone ridges of the Balkan interior. The year is 272 CE. Chickens fret in dusty yards. Coppersmiths yawn over embers that never quite went out. Okay. In the muffled thud of a legionary training yard beats a tempo older than the town itself. Here you stand in a place neither glamorous nor savage, just ordinary. Exactly the kind of landscape where empires first learn what they are made of. Rome, in these decades, suffers a sickness of succession. Emperors bloom and fall like roadside thistles. Armies vote with their swords. Frontier taxes vanish into the pockets of men who rarely visit the frontiers they claim to defend. Supply carts arrive late, wheat molds in damp granaries, and the silver denarius once a proud promise as being shaved until it rattles like tin. Out on the Rhine, chieftains sniff weakness. In the Syrian desert, caravan towns hedge their bets. Meanwhile, villagers like those in Naxos simply patch roofs, count coins, and wonder which eagle standard will march past next. Into this uncertain light steps Flavius Valerius Constantinus, the sturdy infant of Helena, a stablehand's daughter, with Anatolian dust still clinging to her sandals, and Constantius Chlorus, an Illyrian cavalry officer on the rise. You smell the animal warmth of the barracks where Helena visits, balancing a clay bowl of barley gruel as recruits slam shields for rhythm practice. No marble colonnades, no purple silks, just rough wool, iron nails, and the persistent creak of leather harness. What did baby Constantine hear in those first months? The clop of remounts, the crackle of turf fires, orders barked in crisp Latin, but softened by Illyrian accents. He learned, before he could speak, that Rome's language carried as many dialects as helmets. That loyalty was measured in unknown at the daily grain ration more than in gilded slogans. And, growing beside the Danube meant understanding how quickly calm fields could turn to contested ground. Helena, though low-born, was shrewd. At night, by lamp made of beaten bronze, she recited half-remembered myths, mixing Homeric fragments with local hill legend stories of wolves that guarded borders and of emperors who rose from obscurity. She wove practical lessons between the lines. Keep your purse hidden on campaign. Keep your sandals dry. Keep your promises shorter than your ambitions. Constantine listened, eyes wide, while lice crackled in straw mattresses, and the moon angled through wooden shutters. When he could walk, the boy tagged along behind farriers, marveling at the hiss of red-hot irons quenched in water. They taught him how a single loose shoe could lame a horse and therefore topple a legion's timetable. Boring, yes, but foundational. History often pivots on logistical footnotes more than on battlefield heroics. He studied the quartermaster's ledger columns of oats, leather, oil, seeing early that numbers could either starve or sustain an empire by 285 CE. The wider Roman world convulsed in yet another reordering. Diocletian, a fellow Illyrian with flinty eyes, seized power and divided rule among trusted comrades, forming the Tetrarchy. Young Constantine, now a teen, whose shoulders no longer fit a boy's tunic, found himself effectively a diplomatic hostage at the Imperial court in Nicomedia. It was, on parchment, an honor. He would observe the machinery of power up close. In truth, it was an iron-gloved embrace insurance that Constantius Chlorus, newly named Caesar of the West, remained obedient. Traveling south and east across the Bosporus, you ride beside him in imagination. The sea wind smells of brine and cabin tar. Sailors mutter about tax duties on Egyptian grain. and the boy silently counts each creak of the deck to steady his nerves. Caminita dazzles in late afternoon sun, colonnades of imported white marble, aqueducts vaulting over market streets, Greek philosophers debating near incense-laden temples. Yet, beneath the polish, Constantine senses the same chill of contingency he knew in Nasus. Palace is grander, yes, but guards stand wary at every door, and eunuchs trade gossip like merchants trade silk. His days fall into meticulous routine. At dawn, he drills with officers from Thrace and Cappadocia, learning how cataphract armor redistributes weight so a horse may gallop without breaking. Mid-morning, he attends legal readings where scribes scratch wax tablets, recording edicts on fishmongers, stall fees, or citizenship appeals from distant days to dry regulations that nevertheless keep bread loaves measured and roads repaired. Afternoon, he studies rhetoric with Greek tutors, grappling with accents, conjugations, and the subtext of every compliment. Evening brings banquet halls heavy with perfume and suspicion. Courtiers weigh each laugh on scales of survival. You might ask, did Constantine already drift toward the Sol Invictus cult that thrived under the purple banners of Diocletian? Sun discs glint above altars. Hymns promise eternal victory. At the boy watches, collects impressions, remains outwardly devout to whatever expectation passes the corridor. He carves his private faith, not in proclamations, but in observations. How soldiers kneel to Mithras in candlelit caverns. How merchants cross themselves discreetly with Christ's sign in fish markets. How farmers still pour libations to river nymphs. Religion, he realizes, is another supply line. Cut it, and legions may hunger for meaning as surely as for grain. Occasionally, news drifts in, uprisings along the Rhine, famines in Sicily, plague rumors whispered among spice porters. Constantine learns that imperial scribes can revise a dispatch as easily as they revise a census, and that truth travels slower than rumor. Arcana, so he cultivates friends among stable boys, cooks, and laundry women, the invisible network who see more than generals suspect. From them, he gleans trivial details that, when sifted like grain, reveal which frontier is bleeding hardest and which governor secretly hoards silver ingots. Yet, he remains a guest one gilded step away from prisoner. Permission to visit his father's western front is granted rarely and under escort. Each farewell meal with Diocletian reinforces the lesson. Power is a banquet, where every seat is both privilege and chain. He feels the link bite deeper when, in 303 CE, edicts against Christians scorched through the empire. Parchment posted on basilica doors commands churches be burned, scriptures confiscated. Constantine watches as soldiers he once sparred with torch, meeting halls while simultaneously joking about wheat prices. He notes how policy can turn comrades into executioners overnight. Late one autumn, he wanders the palace stables after dusk. Horses stamp, lanterns sputter, and the smell of fermenting hay crowds the air. Overhead, constellations wheel, same stars that guided caravans beyond the Sahara and shepherds in the Alps. He wonders if destiny, like the night sky, is fixed, or if a determined rider can alter his course. He runs a palm along a mare's neck, feeling the twitch of living warmth beneath the hide, and imagines campaigns yet untraveled. On an unremarkable evening, soon after, a courier arrives, breathless, Constantius Chlorus, preparing to campaign. In Britannia, requests his son's presence. Timus. Rumors surge. Some advisors argue to keep the youth as leverage. Others deem the reunion harmless. Galerius, Diocletian's Cogostus, hesitates, then consents, perhaps hoping Constantine will perish on northern bogs. Before dawn, the prince mounts a swift horse and departs Nicomedia at full gallop, reportedly switching mounts at every post station, leaving a trail of spent stallions and astonished postmasters from Bithynia to the Adriatic shore. as hooves drum along Roman roads, engineered by nameless laborers centuries prior. You feel the crossing of thresholds, from courtly captivity to raw frontier air, from son to commander in waiting. Yet questions cloud the horizon. Will Constantius live long enough to pass the mantle? Can a young officer navigate the serpentine politics of a tetrarchy built on mistrust? Beneath his cuirass, does Constantine's heart beat for the old gods of the sun, or for a symbol not yet painted on his standards? The march stretches westward, mile after mile, until the lamps of Nicomedia fade to memory. Somewhere beyond the next ridge lies the channel wind, the camps at Abraham, and a father who commands but also ages. For now, the rider and the empire share the same tension, poised, not yet decided. Asterisk, the year is 305 CE, and the weather above Britannia is precisely as Roman poets always described it: gray, heavy, and too damp to inspire verses. Constantine, newly reunited with his father, Constantius Chlorus, rides into Ebricum modern day. York not as a prince, but as a military officer, dressed in leather, hardened by Balkan winters and Anatolian summers. Rain turns to mist, rising from the stone streets like smoke from tired lungs. His father's face, weathered and pale from a recent illness, carries more lines than memory had preserved. Still, his grip is firm when they clasp forearms in the privacy of the governor's villa. They do not waste time on sentiment. The campaign waits. So do uprisings in northern Britain. And in the silence between words, the elder man's breath hitches too often. As Constantine helps manage logistics, he studies how his father commands, not with fury, but with attention. Constantius walks slowly through camps, inspecting latrines and grain sacks with the same seriousness as he does armor or reports. He speaks to translators about the complaints of local tribes, leasons. Constantine notes this especially. Leadership, here on the frontier, does not always roar. Often it simply watches longer than others are willing to. There is little glory in this campaign. No pitched battles for historians to romanticize. Instead, there are days of trudging through wet heather and cold earthworks, negotiating with restive picks and reinforcing decaying fortlets built a century before. Constantine is assigned command of a scouting unit, small, mobile, and largely expendable. From them, he learns how to read a forest by its birds, how to distinguish a rabbit track from a human one, and how the soil smells different just before a surprise attack. These small, muddy lessons are more vital than any philosophical tutoring in Nicomedia. He watches how soldiers respond to predictable patterns: poor rations, tired paymasters, and broken promises. Their patience thins. Their faith doesn't vanish, simply shifts to whoever rides at the front when it matters most. Constantine begins to ride more often, and then, suddenly, the campaign ends not in triumph, but in death. Constantius Chlorus dies in July of 306 CE in Abricum, with his son by his side. The soldiers are not surprised. They have seen the coughing, the quiet winces, the shortened walks. What surprises them is what happens next. One morning, as the mists lift from the parade ground, the legions call for Constantine, not with whispers or subtle hints. They declare it. Shields struck with swords, chants echoing through the wet stone walls. Ave, Imperator. Not Caesar, not Tetrarch, not some carefully assigned role through the Byzantine logic of Diocletian's balance of 4 emperors. No, Emperor, it is mutiny wrapped in tradition, but it's also loyalty, a different kind, carved out of cold marches, shared tents, and quiet competence. Constantine steps forward. He doesn't object. He doesn't stammer. He accepts the purple cloak rumor to have been dyed from crushed Tyrian mollusks gathered by his own household staff and addresses the men. There is no grand speech. It's just a nod to duty, to Rome, and to the old gods. For now, News reaches Galerius in the east with the venom of broken protocol. Constantine was never supposed to be emperor. He was a placeholder, at best a son, meant to serve under others in a tetrarchy built on controlled succession. But Galerius, knowing the loyalty of British legions and the instability of Rome's frontiers, cannot afford a war. He grudgingly acknowledges Constantine Knight as full Augustus, but as Caesar, a junior role. It's a compromise. Constantine accepts, outwardly, but in private, a slow, deliberate plan begins. He settles near Treveri, modern-day Trier, in Gaul, where he builds his reputation, not with brutality, but with administration. Grain shipments are restored. Tax collectors are restrained. Local city walls are improved. He studies the tensions between Maxentius, the usurper, and Romand Galerius, Rhea, who now tries to maintain balance from afar. Each evening in his villa, he reviews maps, not of conquest, but of roads. Roman roads, because whoever controls the roads controls the grain, and whoever controls the grain controls the cities. Constantine is not yet dreaming of cathedrals or crosses. Chaos, dreaming of infrastructure. In Gaul, he also begins to reform how the military is supplied, rather than squeezing cities for supplies. Just before a campaign, he establishes stationary granaries near major roads. Soldiers are rotated through nearby posts, not just to keep them sharp, but to keep them fed. This is boring history, yet deeply consequential. Morale rises, desertions drop, loyalty grows. Meanwhile, whispers reach Constantine's court about strange Christian sects meeting by lamplight, refusing to sacrifice to the emperor's image. He does not persecute them, nor does he endorse them. Not yet, Teddy observes. The empire's religious patchwork fascinates him not for its spirituality, but for its organizational possibility. The Christian church, scattered though it is, possesses hierarchy, communication networks, and shared text. He sees not just a belief system, but a structure. Elsewhere, imperial politics descend into chaos. Galerius dies of disease. Maxentius fortifies Rome. Licinius, another rival, scrambles for support in the Balkans. The tetrarchy's elegant geometry shatters, leaving a map riddled with ambitions. It's in this moment, not of clarity, but of fracture, that Constantine begins to dream of something more than survival. He begins to see himself as an architect, not just of buildings or policy, but of fate, a unifier, rebuilder. One fog-draped morning, he surveys a forum being repaired after years of disrepair. Merchants shuffle by. A tax collector argues with a potter. An old soldier limps past carrying barley in a cloth sack. Nothing glorious. Yet Constantine lingers. He asks his architect, what if a city could reflect order? Not just defensive walls, but moral symmetry. What if it could rise in the east, where trade still flowed, and where old mythologies hadn't yet calcified into decay? He doesn't name the idea yet, but it takes root. A new capital, new Rome. Evenings, when reports from other claimants to the throne arrive, he reads them like puzzle pieces. He understands that conquering the empire won't come through banners alone. It will come through preparation, patience, and timing. One day, while watching a centurion drill new recruits in the courtyard, Constantine whispers to his advisor, "Tell me, if I were to march on Rome, what route would we take? And how soon? Before the Tiber runs red." The question is not answered, and so we end here, not in battle, not in miracle, but in contemplation. A son, once a diplomatic pawn, now quietly reshaping an empire from the administrative benches of Gaul, his sword still sheathed, his gaze fixed southeast. But what exactly would push him to act? What spark would convince him to finally challenge Rome itself? And what strange symbol would he carry when he did? The year's 311 CE. Constantine has been shaping his slice of the empire with quiet, disciplining managing Gaul, reinforcing frontiers, and cultivating the loyalty of his soldiers. But in the shadow of every command and reform, a question smolders. When? When will he act? When will Rome itself be within reach? That spark arrives in the form of chaos from Rome. Maxentius, the self-declared emperor, rules there with increasing paranoia. Once welcomed as a son of Rome, he has grown suspicious, autocratic, and wasteful. The Senate has little power. The people are fed, but only just. He strengthened the city's walls, built fortresses along the Tiber, and fortified bridges, but he is not beloved, and the armies in the north know it. Whispers reach Constantine that Maxentius is cracking beneath the strain. His control is paper-thin beyond Rome's walls. His officers are restless, his alliances brittle, knit. The roads, those lifelines, Constantine so carefully mapped are slowly closing to him. And yet, Maxentius clings to a single asset, Rome itself, the eternal city. Whoever holds it still commands symbolic power. Constantine does not wait for the invitation. He prepares. He gathers his men at Lutetia, modern-day Paris, then at Arles, issuing no grand decree, no trumpet sounds, just orders, precise, quiet, steel buckled, grain loaded, scouts dispatched. The army begins moving south, thousands of men, each with their own reason, some for coin, some for glory, some for the mere stability Constantine has managed to maintain. They carry standards marked not with Jupiter or Mars, but something stranger. In private, Constantine has had a vision, so he later claims. Whether it was a dream, a tactical calculation, or a mystical experience remains one of the great ambiguities of history. He sees, or says he sees, a sign in the sky, a cross, or a symbol shaped like overlapping Greek letters, Chi and Rho, the first two letters of Christ, accompanied by the phrase, in hoc signo vinces, in this sign, conquer. He orders it painted on the shields. It is an astonishing decision, one that defies the gods of his ancestors and the cults of the army. But perhaps that's the point. Jupiter has not delivered peace. Mars has not ended mutiny. The sun god's favor has grown noisier, less certain. Christianity, in contrast, offers a single God, a single truth, and a moral framework his weary empire may need more than ever, so he gambles. The Chi-Rho is painted. Soldiers murmur, but do not object. Anything, it gives them the feeling that something new is happening, that they are not merely marching, but witnessing the beginning of something world-altering. The army marches toward Italy through the Alps, just as Hannibal once did, but this time without elephants and without glory. Their path is marked by mud, by narrow passes, and by local governors who must decide, submit or resist. Most submit. Constantine's reputation has outpaced his banners. By the time he reaches northern Italy, his force is still outnumbered. Maxentius controls more legions. He commands the city's walls. But Constantine moves fast. He wins a series of skirmishes with brutal efficiency, sparing towns that surrender and punishing those that delay him. He maintains discipline. Plundering is forbidden. Civilians are spared. Every action wields his image, not just as a conqueror, but as a restorer. And then, October 28th, 312, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. It's not the largest battle Rome has seen. It doesn't reshape provinces or destroy cities, but it becomes a myth. The moment the empire changes course, Constantine approaches the Tiber River, where the Milvian Bridge connects his forces to the northern approach of Rome. Maxentius has destroyed the main bridge and built a makeshift one of pontoons, confident that he can lure Constantine into an exposed position and then collapse it. But in a move both strategic and reckless, Maxentius crosses the river first, hoping to push Constantine's smaller force backward. It is a mistake. In the fog of combat, Constantine's cavalry holds firm. His infantry resists. Maxentus, surrounded by panic and poor planning, is pushed back toward the river. The temporary bridge, overloaded and unsound, collapses. His men plunge into the Tiber, and Maxentus drowns. Armor heavy and forgotten by his gods, by nightfall, Constantine is at the gates of Rome. He does not sack the city. He enters it with quiet authority, his troops in formation, the people watching from balconies, unsure whether to cheer or pray. He does not punish the Senate. He does not raise the temples. Instead, he offers a new word, toleration. The Edict of Milan, issued soon after, grants freedom of worship, not just to Christians, but to all religious groups. It is revolutionary in its moderation. After centuries of persecution and imperial cults, Constantine now reshapes Rome with restraint. And yet, beneath the calm surface, deep changes begin. Christian bishops are invited to consult on policy. Imperial coins begin to lose their pagan symbols. Public buildings are commissioned not just for baths or theaters, but for worship, Christian worship. In Constantine, he does not convert publicly, not yet. He remains a complex figure, part traditionalist, part reformer. He walks among pagan rituals and Christian bishops with equal ease, never fully declaring allegiance, but always moving the balance. The next years will see greater changes. The founding of Constantinople, the convening of the Council of Nicaea, and the slow, steady elevation of Christianity from persecuted cult to imperial faith. But the shift begins here, in mud, in mist, and in the boring but vital work of marching, building, feeding, and always choosing which signs to paint on shields, and which gods to trust with empire. And so, as the fires along the Milvian Bridge cool, and the river resumes its quiet path beneath broken pontoon planks, we end this first story not with a coronation, but with a question. Did Constantine truly believe in the sign he saw? Did he simply understand that history needs symbols more than explanations? The Danube is not a peaceful river. It coils across the northern frontier of the Roman Empire like a restless question mark, separating the supposedly civilized world from the cold, forested uncertainty of the Barbaricum. And in the early 4th century, it does more than mark a border, defines an ideological edge, a place where the Roman dream of order brushes up against the reality of tribes who owe nothing to Latin law or imperial decree. When Constantine first arrives along the Danube frontier, he is not yet the emperor of everything. He is still Caesar of the West, technically subordinate to others in the tetrarchic framework, tasked with defending Roman Gaul and keeping order along the Rhine. But as tensions boil in Italy and the East, Constantine turns his eyes to the north, toward the Danubian province, places like Pannonia, Dacia, and Moesia, whose names are remembered today only by historians in stone tablets, was covered in forgotten fields. Why does he go there? Because control of the frontier means control of movement, and movement of soldiers, supplies, trade caravans, even stories is the bloodstream of empire. The Danube frontier at this moment in history is fragile. The once stable limes, those fortified border zones built with towers, earthworks, and wooden palisades, have fallen into neglect. Budget cuts, corruption, quiet collapses. Roman watchtowers now stand half-manned. Patrols go out and don't return. Merchants disappear. And across the river, tribal confederations like the Sarmatians, Goths, and Carpi shift and stir, sensing opportunity. But Constantine doesn't simply react. He studies. He arrives not with the thunder of conquest, but with the slow, boring work of rebuilding what's been lost. His army isn't just a force, it's a mobile construction crew. Roads are restoned, bridges are repaired. Signal towers are fitted with fresh torch systems. Warehouses are inspected. Invoices checked. He walks the walls of crumbling forts. at Sirmium, Singidunum, and Aquincum, noting the weeds between bricks and the powdery mortar crumbling like bone meal. The local commanders expect scolding, but receive questions instead. How many supply wagons make it through each month? When was the last shipment of salt? Which unit has the best morale? Constantine, unlike many generals before him, understands that an empire doesn't fall from outside. It collapses from within through laziness, miscommunication, neglect. So he begins to repair not with swords, but with ledges. Still, war is not far behind. The Sarmatians, a nomadic horse riding people from the vast plains beyond the river, begin raiding deeper and deeper into Roman territory. They are not aiming to conquer Rome. They seek resources, tools, horses, women, grain, the kind of things denied to them by drought or overpopulation. Constantine responds swiftly, but not rashly. He crosses the Danube at multiple points, not in a full-scale invasion, but in a series of surgical strikes. Light cavalry harass the Sarmatian bands, not to annihilate them, but to redirect them. Roman engineers built temporary bridges in record times. Overnight, using logs floated downstream and fitted with iron clamps heated in fire pits. It is not glorious work. There are no epic charges, no speeches to legions before marble gates, foggy mornings, mud-choked wheels, and young soldiers adjusting straps on their armor until the leather creaks like a funeral dirge. But the rhythm begins to shift. By 322 CE, Constantine has reasserted control over the Mysian limes. Garrisons are restaffed. Tribal leaders from across the river are summoned not to kneel, but to talk. They bring rough furs and nervously shift their weight as they step into Roman tents. Constantine does not humiliate them. He offers treaties contingent upon tribute, land, stability, and the return of prisoners. The tribes, long used to Rome's erratic blend of violence and condescension, are surprised by its combination of force and formality. Some agree, others stall, but all sense that the empire's northern face is no longer asleep. Among the most important changes is something invisible to most eyes: recruitment. Rather than banishing tribal peoples, Constantine allows them to settle inside the empire in designated zones, so long as their sons serve in the auxilia, the auxiliary forces that support the legions. It's a delicate balance. Integration without surrender, foreign strength without cultural dilution. Rome has tried this before, sometimes with disastrous results. But Constantine's version is different because it is localized. He supervises each agreement, personally or through trusted officers. He requires oaths. He ensures that grain allotments, often more important than gold, are honored. Evenings in his Danubian headquarters are not quiet. They are filled with the scratching of quills, the pounding of hooves, the creaking of wagon wheels, bringing salt and fish oil from the Black Sea. Constantine listens to reports from every fort, every minor skirmish. He maps not just enemy movements, but road conditions. Where can grain carts pass in the spring? Which valleys flood first? Which outposts run low on horseshoes? Boring questions. But these are the questions that win wars. One winter evening, in the fortress town of Viminicium, Constantine walks along the riverside after the camp has gone quiet. Snow crunches underfoot. Steam rises from oxen in nearby pens. The Danube flows in slow, dark sheets, the moon glazing its surface like spilled mercury. He pauses near a watchtower and looks north. It's not fear he feels, it's a kind of responsibility. On the other side of that river lies not just threat, but potential. Trade, manpower, alliances. If Rome keeps viewing every tribe beyond its border as an enemy, it will remain forever on the defensive. But if those tribes can be entangled, even empowered, under Rome's structure, then perhaps the empire won't need to conquer the world, it can simply absorb it. This is Constantine's quiet vision, not just military victory, but administrative. Coherence. He returns to his tent and orders a new set of diplomatic missions northward. New terms, new oaths, new land grants. Rome will no longer simply guard the Danube. It will reorganize it. And then, something unexpected happens. Word comes that Constantine's rival, Licinius, ruling the eastern half of the empire, has begun negotiating with Gothic chieftains across the river. Not to repel them, but to recruit them. He's building a shadow army, possibly planning a future confrontation. Constantine, always patient, takes note. He doesn't yet retaliate, but he begins to shift garrisons, test bridges, and increase grain stores that the Danube, once simply a river, now becomes a stage for a coming war between East and West. But for now, it remains cold, quiet, and uncertain. And so, in this first part of the story, we watch Constantine, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker, rebuilding roads, calming borders, whispering treaties, and gathering strength. Every decision, boring as it may appear, lays a stone in the foundation of what he will soon claim. Not half the empire, but all of it. Yet a question drifts like fog across the river. By 323 CE, Constantine's Danubian frontier is no longer just a defensive line. It has become a kind of mirror, one that reflects what the empire might yet become: flexible, resilient, and capable of absorbing the unfamiliar. On paper, he is still only Emperor of the West. In reality, he governs like a ruler of the whole. His officers no longer wait for approval from Rome or the eastern capitals. The governors in Mysia and Pannonia report directly to him, bypassing old chains of command. It is an empire within an empire, stitched together, not with ceremony, but with competence. And in this quiet consolidation, Constantine's genius continues to unfold, not on battlefields, but in the slow architecture of systems. Take, for instance, the matter of supply. Under earlier emperors, border regions were often fed by long and unreliable supply chains that stretched from Italy or even Africa. Constantine ends this dependency. Instead, he issues orders to expand local production. Small villa rusticero Roman farming complex, established near rivers and along old roads. Wheat, barley, and lentils are grown under imperial oversight. He even institutes regional grain storage, with thresholds set not by harvest totals, but by distance from the nearest hostile tribe. It is an unusual metric, unconventional, even bureaucratic. But it works. Soon, outposts that once relied on slow, rotting carts from Italy can feed themselves. Morale improves. Mutinies vanish. The soldiers, often drawn from the same Danubian stock as their enemies across the river, began to take pride not just in defending Rome, but in stabilizing it. But as the provinces.com, tensions rise elsewhere. The Eastern Emperor, Licinius, has been watching. At first, the rivalry was theoretical. The empire had split before, and splits had healed. But by now, the dividing line between Constantine and Licinius has hardened into a shadow border. Each monitors the other. Each signs treaties with tribes just beyond the reach of the other. Each adjusts coinage, flirts with bishops, dispatches letters to towns, boasting of their own piety and rightful claim to imperial legitimacy. It is a cold war of statutes, oaths, and alliances. Licinius, ruler of the East, is no fool. He knows that if Constantine consolidates the Danube long enough, he will eventually march south. So Licinius begins fortifying his side of the frontier. He recruits mercenaries from among the Goths and Carpae, offering land and coin. Constantine, in turn, reinforces garrisons and sends quiet messages to Christian communities in Licinius's lands, reminding them who issued the Edict of Milan, who spared their churches, who honored their bishops. Neither man speaks of war aloud, but the preparations speak louder than words. Meanwhile, Constantine does something few rulers have dared before. He reorganizes the Danube itself, not physically. Of course, the river still runs from the Black Forest to the Black Sea, winding through reeds and cliffs and merchant ports. But administratively, he redraws provincial boundaries. The dioceses are split into smaller, more manageable units. Civil governors are separated from military officers. Okay? Bureaucratic reform that seems dull until you realize that it prevents any one man from becoming too powerful. Even more critically, Constantine formalizes the comitatus mobile field, army that does not sit in garrisons but moves across the empire as needed. It is stationed not in the luxurious halls of Italy or the schools of Athens, but here in the Danubian backwoods, where swamps thicken and fortresses rot unless someone keeps watch. The comitatus is a tool, fast, loyal, and above all, responsive. 2. Supply it. Constantine resurrects ancient logistics. Way stations along the Via Militaris are restored. Old cursus, publicis, routes, Imperial, postal roads are reopened. Maps are updated not just by cartographers, but by soldiers who report missing bridges, washed out causeways, and towns that haven't paid taxes in years. In effect, Constantine is turning the Danube frontier into a laboratory for his vision of Rome. Not an empire of lazy elegance, but a machine of survival. But not all is calculation. One night, Constantine visits a border shrine near the Iron Gates. It's a gorge where the Danube narrows and carves its way through the Carpathians. Local superstition holds that the river spirits here are older than Rome, older than the gods themselves. The soldiers avoid the area at night. Fishermen leave offerings in hollow trees. Constantine stands alone at the edge, the moon reflecting off the rushing water. He does not pray. He listens, not to the river spirits, but to the sound, the churn of water over stone, the distant hoot of an owl, the low thrum of something ancient moving through history. Here, between superstition and administration, between Roman law and tribal memory, lies the truth. Borders are illusions. Rivers don't obey maps. And empires, if they survive at all, do so only by learning how to bend without breaking. He returns to camp and issues an unusual order, a census, not just of Roman citizens, but of tribal inhabitants within 100 miles of the frontier. He wants to know who's really there by name, by trade, by location, not to tax them, not yet, but to understand them. A week later, commissions the construction of a new fort not facing the enemy, but facing inward toward Roman lands. A signal, perhaps, that the real threat is not always beyond the river, but sometimes within it. By late 323 CE, Constantine has succeeded in doing what few before him have managed. He has stabilized the Danube, not with blood, not with fear, but with infrastructure, respect, and clarity. The tribal incursions slow. Roman garrisons report fewer skirmishes. Trade resumes, and Constantine, now a master of the frontier, sets his sights on a different river, the Bosporus. For while the Danube may have been the empire's spine, the Bosporus thin and glittering between Europe and Asia's its Branstem to secure it. Constantine will need more than roads and treaties. He will need a new city, and possibly a new kind of empire. But for now, the Danube sleeps. Its waters carry barges, its watchtowers are manned, and its soldiers sharpen blades, not for conquest, but for order. And as Constantine gazes into the slow winter flow, one question remains. Can the systems he built here hold when war comes from within? By early 324 CE, the Danube frontier stands fortified, not only in stone, but in structure. The reforms are in place. The soldiers are fed. The roads are navigable. Constantine, once a frontier general wrestling with mud and mutiny, now commands something more than land. He commands momentum, but frontiers, by their nature, are not just physical. they are philosophical. And soon, the Danube becomes the rear because the true frontier now lies within the empire itself. Tensions with Licinius, ruler of the East, have reached their limit. They had been conquerors in name, co-signers of edicts, even co-brothers. Licinus married Constantine's half-sister. But marriage cannot erase ambition, and compromise does not erase contradiction. Licinius, under increasing pressure, begins rolling back Constantine's Christian toleration policies, targeting bishops and shutting down churches. He reintroduces imperial cult worship in the East, not aggressively, but deliberately, to Constantine. This is more than policy, it is a signal. It tells him that the East will never harmonize with the West, not while it's under another man's rule, not while Rome remains split between competing ideologies. And so, he makes his decision. War is declared, but not with trumpets and pageantry. It begins, as always, with logistics. Constantine leaves Sirmium, a fortified city along the Danube, and begins a southern campaign. His path is familiar now, across Pannonia, down the Morava River Valley, and toward the Bosporus. His army moves quickly, but not blindly. Scouts move days ahead. Supply wagons are staggered for efficiency. Local populations are instructed not to flee, but to support, paid in coin and promise. And this time, unlike the border wars before it, Constantine brings not just a mobile force, but his best generals, his sons, and a growing number of Christian officers. Asterisk, the first engagement comes at Adrianople. Licinius's troops, drawn from eastern legions and barbarian auxiliaries, are well organized. The battle is brutal. Thousands die. But Constantine's Danubian-hardened forces push through, breaking Licinius's center with a mix of flanking cavalry and direct assault. The discipline born on the northern frontier proves decisive. No panic, no breakdown, methodical execution. Licinius retreats across the Bosporus to Byzantium. There, the conflict shifts from fields to water. The narrow strait is heavily defended. Licinius controls the eastern shore. Constantine must now move an army across the sea route to enemy control. But he is not without options. A flotilla of small ships built quietly along Danubian tributaries arrives by overland transport, pulled by oxen, carried in pieces, assembled. Like a puzzle along the western shore of the Bosporus, Constantine crosses. The final confrontation takes place at Chrysopolis, just opposite Byzantium. In September of 324, Licinius, despite his defensive position, cannot withstand Constantine's momentum. His forces fracture, his alliances collapse, and he, the last rival of the Tetrarchic era, is captured and executed not immediately, but shortly after. In the quiet way emperors dispatch former emperors, the civil war is over. Constantine stands alone. He is now emperor of the entire Roman Empire, west and east, the first since Diocletian's division to reunify it. Not through blood alone, but through foresight, patience, and the boring, exacting science of governance. And what of the Danube? It does not fade in the years following Constantine's victory. It becomes a model. His reforms, their local grain production, road restoration, separate military and civil authority are replicated across the empire. Cities in Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt began reporting their own garrison repairs, their own localized supply storage, even their own tribal agreements modeled after Constantine's Danubian strategy. He appoints new governors, builds new towns, chews coins with Christian symbols, subtle at first, then more pronounced. He invites bishops to councils, basilicas, and, as the empire shifts, so too does its center. For Constantine, Rome, while still sacred, is no longer sufficient. The empire needs a new capital, one closer to the frontiers, one that can oversee the Danube, the Bosporus, and the trade routes of both east and west, a city both old and new. He selects Byzantium. The decision is not hasty. He knows the terrain. He's fought near it, crossed its waters, studied its strengths. A natural harbor, a defensible position, in a symbolic location between Europe and Asia, between past and future. He renames it Nova Romanu Rome, but history will call it something else. Constantinople. The construction begins with Imperial urgency. Materials are hauled from every corner of the empire. Statues from Athens, marble from Egypt, workers from Syria and Gaul, and yes, engineers from the Danube. Some of the bridges that once spanned the Sava and the Drava are dismantled and repurposed. Literal stones from the frontier carried south to build the new capital. Every brick, every measurement, every marketplace echoes the lessons learned in muddy garrisons and fog-drenched outposts. And yet, even in triumph, questions linger. Can an empire built on tolerance and reform withstand the return of old ambitions? Will Constantine's vision, born of border fortresses and cautious diplomacies, survive the ambitions of his sons? Will the Danube remain calm, or will it again become a wound across the body of Rome? For now, Constantine stands on the hills above Byzantium, watching his new capital rise. Somewhere, far to the north, the river still flows, cradling settlements, whispering secrets between reeds, and he knows what most emperors forget, that an empire is not built on marble. It is built on mud, grain, oaths, and time. Asterisk, imagine being the only soldier in a palace full of politicians. Not an ordinary soldier, but a young man shaped by barracks, border winds, and the weary humor of men who sharpen blades beside open fires. Then, suddenly, without battle, without warning, you are summoned into the heart of imperial power, the court of Diocletian, ruler of half the known world. This is what happens to Constantine around 293 CE. At this moment in history, Rome has not yet fallen, but it has fractured. Over the past 5 decades, the empire has seen nearly 30 emperors, most of them ending their reigns not with retirement, but with assassination. The provinces are unstable. Armies have grown more loyal to paymasters than to principals. The civil administrations so long ignored us, now the only thing preventing total collapse in response. Diocletian enacts the tetrarchial rule of 4. 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, and 2 junior ones, Caesars. It is a chessboard of titles and geography. A strange, delicate balance meant to control rebellion before it ignites, to hold it together. Cletian builds a new kind of imperial court, one of order, paperwork, fear. This is where Constantine arrives. He is the son of Constantius Chlorus, one of the junior Caesars, and as such, he is invited, or more accurately, required to serve under Diocletian in Nicomedia, the eastern capital. Officially, he is there to observe. In reality, he is a hostage in plain sight, a living reminder to Constantius to remain obedient. The court of Diocletian is unlike anything Constantine has ever seen. It is not a battlefield. It is a theater. Marble floors gleam under thousands of sandals. Scrolls are stacked in every corner, tax records, military assignments, legal decrees, census updates. Courtiers wear robes embroidered with gold thread and rehearse every sentence. Before speaking, eunuchs guard the doors. The air smells of incense, ink, and cold ambition. Every morning begins with the audientia, the emperor's audience. Bureaucrats from across the empire line up to report, petition, or offer tribute. They bow. They speak in carefully chosen Latin. Some recite their entire case without ever looking up. One wrong word, one misplaced comma in the wrong document hand. A man can vanish. Diocletian, seated behind veils of purple silk, listens in silence. His face is expressionless. His advisors whisper in his ears. His secretaries record everything, says little, but when he does, His words carry the weight of policy. Constantine watches. He doesn't speak. He doesn't question. He absorbs. He watches how governors kneel, how tribute is counted, how laws are recited from memory, then rewritten by decree. He sees how power is not displayed through anger, but through silence, delay, and procedure. But Constantine is not just a political ornament. Diocletian sends him on campaign not as a commander, but as a junior officer under strict supervision. He fights in Mesopotamia, near the Persian border. He serves under men who do not like him, do not trust him, and are instructed not to let him out of sight. Still, he learns. He studies how supply lines are managed in desert terrain, how Persian cavalry patterns shift with the seasons, how alliances are bought and sold on the backs of translators. He notes how soldiers complain about pay, and how the complaint never reaches the palace unless the courier is very careful. Every small detail is stored filed, not in scrolls, but in memory. When not on campaign, he trains with the guards. He spars with men from Syria, Cappadocia, and Arabia. His arms bear bruises from their curved swords and thick shields. He learns to fight with speed, to dodge rather than clash, to predict motion by listening. And while others dine in silken robes and recite verses from Virgil, Constantine dines with soldiers and barley bread, olives, and goat cheese. But the most important lessons are not military. They are administrative. He is assigned to assist Coriol's local city officials tasked with managing taxes, festivals, and basic order. It is dull, grinding work. Each city in the empire has its own budget, its own debts, its own grain allotments. Constantine sees how a single late shipment of olive oil can spiral into riots. He reads reports about aqueduct failures, plague outbreaks, and missing census records. And again, he absorbs. He comes to understand that the empire's strength does not lie in statues or slogans. It lies in timely grain, clear roads, uninterrupted irrigation, and it lies in fear, not terror, but the fear of being forgotten by the system, to be left out of the supply list. K, to be named in a dispatch as non-compliant, to be noticed by the wrong clerk. Through all of this, Constantine grows increasingly aware of his place in the game. He is not in control. He is being watched, managed, positioned, but he does not rebel. He waits. He flatters when necessary. He recites laws back to the senators who wrote them. He completes every assignment with precision. And behind closed doors, he writes letters to his father, carefully coded to avoid suspicion. Troop morale in the West, about frontier conditions along the Rhine, about which governors are loyal, and which are simply waiting for an opportunity. Diocletian, too, watches. He sees a young man who obeys but does not grovel, who learns but does not mimic, plays the game but only just enough. In private moments, Diocletian wonders what this boy will become. One day, during a tribunal in the eastern provinces, Constantine is given a chance to lead a small investigative team into a tax rebellion in Cilicia. A formality, an errand, but he completes it in half the expected time, recovers twice the expected revenue, sends back a report written so precisely that even Diocletian's scribes cannot find fault with it. No violence, no executions, just negotiation, enforcement, and a sudden, sharp understanding of how far a gold coin travels in an underfed town. The report circulates. People begin to take notice. He is no longer just a soldier or a hostage. He is becoming something dangerous, but he remains quiet, obedient, a shadow in the marble corridors, until one day a message arrives from the west. His father, Constantius Chlorus, is ill, perhaps dying. He asks for his son. Diocletian delays. Constantine waits. And then suddenly he acts. In the dark of night, Constantine flees Nicomedia, leaving behind silks, scrolls, and bureaucracy. He rides hard, stealing imperial horses from post stations. changing mounts at every relay. Legend says he travels across the Balkans in record time, leaving behind shattered saddle straps and stunned guards. He disappears into the mist, taging, not toward conquest, but toward family, and the imperial court watches his dust vanish on the road. But the question hangs over every corridor, every marble column, every scribal office in Diocletian's palace. Did they just let a future emperor escape? Asterisk. The road from Nicomedia to the western front is long, crosses hills baked in Anatolian sun, threads through Thracian forests, scrapes the edges of a crumbling empire that has learned to watch always its own messengers for signs of disobedience. And yet, Constantine rides. What he does is not merely flight. It is escape from containment by the time imperial couriers realize what has happened. He has already crossed into Illyricum, moving west through the familiar territory of his youth. The son of Constantius Chlorus is returning to the world of soldiers, of timber camps, of earth walls and border garrisons, not as a prisoner or observer, but as heir presumptive. He reaches his father in a brook, modern-day York, just days before the old man dies. There is no time for reunion. There is only the quiet rhythm of a deathbed physician's murmuring, servants bringing water, rustling tunics, whispered orders, and Constantine, now in his early 30s, kneels beside the man who taught him not by decree, but by example. Constantius's breath is shallow, his eyes open only briefly. He grips his son's hand, and then he is gone. The soldiers do not wait. They gather in formation outside the fort at dawn, not with ceremony, but with certainty. No senatorial approval, no tetrarchic nomination, just loyalty, built over years. They raise their shields, strike them with fists, and hail Constantine as Imperator.E does not resist. He accepts this moment, simple, direct, quick, and unsanctioned, sets everything in motion. Back in Nicomedia, Diocletian is gone too. He has retired, an almost unthinkable act for a Roman emperor. He lives in a palace overlooking the Adriatic Sea, tending to gardens and occasionally writing letters that sound more philosophical than imperial. The empire he left behind is now divided among successors who are supposed to uphold the stability of the tetrarchy. But the tetrarchy is already splintering. Maxentius seizes control in Rome. Licinius rises in the east, and Constantine rules the west, or claims to. Officially, he is only a Caesar, the junior role, but he doesn't act like one. He begins issuing edicts, rebuilding towns, commanding legions, signing letters as if he is Augustus. The court in the east fumes, but they hesitate to challenge him. Why? 'Cause even now, Constantine remains one step ahead. The lessons he learned in Diocletian's court were not wasted. He knows the language of legality, the timetable of bureaucracy, and the importance of delay. He moves carefully, ensuring each action has the veneer of tradition. Even when he bends the rules, he does not confront Rome. He bypasses it. He does not issue religious reform. He tolerates it. He does not claim divine ancestry. He claims competence. And in doing so, he builds a base stronger than marble, the quiet faith of provincial commanders, the respect of merchants, and the loyalty of men who sharpen blades in tents, not courts. But not all debts are forgotten. In the palaces of the East, Teias, who once held power over Constantine, now speak his name with caution. They remember how still he stood during the tribunals, how clearly he read back laws, how he never raised his voice, even when slighted. They thought they had tamed him. They were wrong, for Constantine is not Diocletian. He is not content to stabilize. He intends to reshape in Gaul. He begins to draft new coinage, gold solidus, thin and precise, with his face on one side and symbolic imagery on the other, sometimes Jupiter, sometimes Sol Invictus. sometimes even vague nods to Christianity, though not yet overt. The ambiguity is intentional. He does not need the favor of one God. He needs the support of many peoples. He restores roads, not temples. He funds bridge repairs before theaters. He commissions new laws focused on local governance, tightening city responsibilities, streamlining tax collection, and ensuring grain shipments reach even the furthest towns before winter. These are not laws to inspire poetry. They are laws to keep order, and beneath them all runs a simple message. Constantine is watching, but in the corners of his mind, Constantine remembers something else. The silk-curtained silence of Diocletian's court, the veiled looks, the long, pointless procedures, the fear of being noticed, and the greater fear of being forgotten. He will not rule that way. He does not want purple veils. He wants walls, markets, standing armies. He wants movement. Every year, he travels his province, Cisgal, Britannia, the German frontier, not for war, but for inspection. He listens to local complaints, appoints governors on the basis of competence, not patronage, fires corrupt tax officials, forces wealthy landowners to fulfill their public duties, builds a reputation, not as a tyrant, but as a presence. And still, he waits. He waits as Maxentus grows decadent in Rome. He waits as Licinius strengthens ties with pagan elites in the East. He waits as bishops, siled by prior regimes, begin cautiously returning to their flocks. He does not declare his vision. He builds it, one policy, one road, one restored fort at a time. And in the late evenings, as campfires flicker across the Rhine, he sometimes remembers the halls of Nikon, the marble, the scrolls, the quiet way power passed from hand to hand without blood, until it tends single quotes. He remembers the eunuchs who smiled with dead eyes, the advisors who counted coins as if they were prayers, and he thinks, perhaps, that power cannot be preserved in balance. It must be centralized, or it will rot. So, as Constantine finishes his inspection of the Treveri region and returns to his command tent, he drafts a set of sealed orders. They are addressed to his senior staff and governors. They outline what must be done when, not if, he marches on Rome, because he knows the curtain cannot stay drawn forever. And this time, he will not be the guest. He will be the one who sits behind the veil. But what kind of empire does he intend to build? And will he bring the lessons of bureaucracy with him or abandon them at the gates of Rome? The road from Nicomedia to the Western Front is long. It crosses hills baked in Anatolian sun, threads through Thracian forests, and scrapes the edges of a crumbling empire that has learned to watch always its own messengers for signs of disobedience. And yet, Constantine rides. What he does is not merely flight, it is escape from containment. By the time Imperial couriers realize what has happened, he has already crossed into Illyricum, moving west through the familiar territory of his youth. The son of Constantius Chlorus is returning to the world of soldiers, of timber camps, of earth walls, and border garrisons, not as a prisoner or observer, but as heir presumptive. He reaches his father in a brook, modern-day York, just days before the old man dies. There is no time for reunion. There is only the quiet rhythm of a deathbed physician's murmuring, servants bringing water, rustling tunics, whispered orders, and Constantine, now in his early 30s, kneels beside the man who taught him not by decree, but by example. Constantius's breath is shallow, his eyes open only briefly. He grips his son's hand, and then he is gone. The soldiers do not wait. They gather in formation outside the fort at dawn, not with ceremony, but with certainty. No senatorial approval, no tetrarchic nomination, just loyalty, built over years. They raise their shields, strike them with fists, and hail Constantine as Imperator.E does not resist. He accepts this moment simple, direct, quick, and unsanctioned, sets everything in motion. Back in Nicomedia, Diocletian is gone too. He has retired, an almost unthinkable act for a Roman emperor. He lives in a palace overlooking the Adriatic Sea, tending to gardens and occasionally writing letters that sound more philosophical than imperial. The empire he left behind is now divided among successors who are supposed to uphold the stability of the tetrarchy. But the tetrarchy is already splintering. Maxentius seizes control in Rome. Licinius rises in the east, and Constantine rules the west, or claims to. Officially, he is only a Caesar, the junior role, but he doesn't act like one. He begins issuing edicts, rebuilding towns, commanding legions, signing letters as if he is Augustus. The court in the east fumes, but they hesitate to challenge him. Why? 'Cause even now, Constantine remains one step ahead. The lessons he learned in Diocletian's court were not wasted. He knows the language of legality, the timetable of bureaucracy, and the importance of delay. He moves carefully, ensuring each action has the veneer of tradition. Even when he bends the rules, he does not confront Rome. He bypasses it. He does not issue religious reform. He tolerates it. He does not claim divine ancestry. He claims competence, and in doing so, he builds a base stronger than marble, the quiet faith of provincial commanders, the respect of merchants, and the loyalty of men who sharpen blades in tents, not courts. But not all debts are forgotten. In the palaces of the East, Thais, who once held power over Constantine, now speak his name with caution. They remember how still he stood during the tribunals, how clearly he read back laws, how he never raised his voice, even when slighted. They thought they had tamed him. They were wrong, for Constantine is not Diocletian. He is not content to stabilize. He intends to reshape. In Gaul, he begins to draft new coinage, gold Solidus, thin and precise, with his face on one side and symbolic imagery on the other. Sometimes Sol Invictus, sometimes even vague nods to Christianity, though not yet overt. The ambiguity is intentional. He does not need the favor of one god. He needs the support of many peoples. He restores roads, not temples. He funds bridge repairs before theaters. He commissions new laws focused on local governance, tightening city responsibilities, streamlining tax collection, and ensuring grain shipments reach even the furthest towns before winter. These are not laws to inspire poetry. They are laws to keep order, and beneath them all runs a simple message. Constantine is watching, but in the corners of his mind, Constantine remembers something else: the silk-curtained silence of Diocletian's court, the veiled looks, the long, pointless procedures, the fear of being noticed, and the greater fear of being forgotten. He will not rule that way. He does not want purple veils. He wants walls, markets, standing armies. He wants movement. Every year travels his provinces Gaul, Britannia, the German frontier, not for war, but for inspection. He listens to local complaints, appoints governors on the basis of competence, not patronage. Kia fires corrupt tax officials. Kia forces wealthy landowners to fulfill their public duties. Builds a reputation, not as a tyrant, but as a presence. And still, he waits. He waits as Maxentius grows decadent in Rome. He waits as Licinius strengthens ties with pagan elites in the East. He waits as bishops, exiled by prior regimes, begin cautiously returning to their flocks. He does not declare his vision. He builds it, one policy, one road, one restored fort at a time. And in the late evenings, as campfires flicker across the Rhine, he sometimes remembers the halls of Nicomedia. The marble, the scrolls, the quiet way power passed from hand to hand without blood. Until it didn't. He remembers the eunuchs who smiled with dead eyes. The advisors who counted coins as if they were prayers. And he thinks, perhaps, that power cannot be preserved in balance. It must be centralized, or it will rot so. As Constantine finishes his inspection of the Treveri region and returns to his command tent, he drafts a set of sealed orders. They are addressed to his senior staff and governors. They outline what must be done when, not if, he marches on Rome, because he knows the curtain cannot stay drawn forever. And this time, he will not be the guest. He will be the one who sits behind the veil. But what kind of empire does he intend to build? And will he bring the lessons of bureaucracy with him, or abandon them at the gates of Rome? Asterisk. The years pass. Once the quiet observer in Diocletian's court, becomes the undisputed architect of a new imperial style. Not yet in name, perhaps, but in function. He governs from the field, not the forum. He builds loyalty, not through lineage, but through visibility. His face is known along the roads of Gaul and the frontiers of Britannia. His decisions ripple through grain markets and military rosters. But perhaps most significantly, he remembers how Diocletian tried to control the chaos of Rome through organization. How the court became a mechanism, a machine of scrolls and stamps that turned people into statistics. Diocletian's genius was not military. It was bureaucratic, but bureaucracy alone could not inspire faith. It could not move armies without coin or hold provinces without grain. It needed a face, a name, a rhythm, and Constantine, formed in that machine, now aims to remake it. He begins with structure. Across his domains, he sends out orders to separate the military from civil administration. Governors now oversee taxation, roads, and law courts, but not armies. Generals command troops, but not budgets. Split. Reduces corruption, decentralizes sabotage, and prevents local strongmen from growing too powerful. It is an elegant fix, inspired by the palace bureaucracy of Nicomedia, but simplified. Made practical for provinces far from marble halls. Constantine doesn't just want order, he wants efficiency. Next, he revisits Diocletian's tax policies. The old emperor had imposed fixed tax burdens based on land productivity and headcounts, calculated with astonishing complexity. But the system, while rational, had become oppressive. Towns unable to meet quotas were punished regardless of harvest. Peasants fled. Fields went fallow. Constantine adjusts the system, introducing more flexible grain levies, tax deferments during famine, coin-based assessments where local economies demanded. These tweaks, minor on paper, relieve crushing pressure from entire regions. Stability returns, revolts drop. Farmers begin to trust again, not because they like their emperor, but because they know what to expect. And then there is the matter of religion, the single greatest tension Constantine witnessed in Diocletian's court. More than military disputes or economic decline was the slow, deliberate persecution of Christians. He saw it unfold in whispers, then in policy, in letters sent to governors, in temple budgets expanded, Christian meeting houses closed, bishops exiled, scriptures confiscated. Not overnight, but with cold precision. Diocletian saw Christianity as a threat not to Rome's gods, but to Rome's unity. Constantine saw something else. He saw a movement not defined by wealth or region, but by identity, one that stretched from Syrian port cities to Iberian hills. It was already a network, already a community. And despite the fires, it did not disappear. Now, as Emperor of the West, Constantine does not persecute, nor does he yet convert. He waits, watches, attends occasional services, corresponds quietly with bishops, reinstates a few who had been banished under earlier edicts. Most importantly, he lets them speak. When Christian communities meet to resolve internal disputes in doctrine, leadership, or heresy, he does not silence them. He gives them space, often a literal space, land grants for basilicas or imperial buildings repurposed for Christian use. He is not yet a Christian ruler, but he is creating Christian governance. The bureaucrats who once watched him in Nicomedia now read his letters with unease. They had known him as quiet, observant, obedient. Now his handwriting commands, his directives override old policies. He does not seek consensus. He sends instructions. When they delay, he bypasses them. When they object, he replaces them in his capitals from Dravarum Trier to Airlate Arles. He erects audience halls, not temples. Builds arches to celebrate victories over rebellion, not over foreign peoples. He constructs public baths, forums, and granaries, ensuring every civic structure serves both function and memory. He does not erect statues of gods. He raises walls that keep grain dry through winter. But Constantine has not forgotten Rome. While he governs from the provinces, he does not ignore the city. He sends emissaries, offers coin to fund repairs. But he does not seek validation from its senate or its traditions. Why? Because he is building a future that no longer depends on them. In the quiet halls of Diocletian's former court, officials still debate titles and decrees. Constantine is debating direction. One evening, near the banks of the Rhine, he sits with his advisors around a fire. The maps are unrolled. The conversation is not about supply routes or taxes. It is about Rome's soul. One advisor asks, can Rome survive without Rome? Constantine says nothing for a long while. Then, finally, Rome is a river. It flows into what I choose to build. He means it. He is preparing something else. A shift. Capital. It's a new model of power that still echoes with Roman dignity, but no longer bows to its ruins. And then, in a quiet policy decision, he abolishes the title of Caesar for his successors. No more junior emperors. It's no more tetrarchic hierarchy. He names his sons as Kemperus Augusti, not Caesars. It is a return to dynasty, to blood, to clarity. It is, in many ways, rejection of Diocletian's system. Not because it failed, but because Constantine has outgrown it. He took from it what worked: structure, planning, governance, and left behind what didn't: paralysis over complexity. Fear. The soldier who once stood at the back of the audience chamber now writes the laws that audience chambers must follow. The quiet observer now directs observers. The guest has become the host. And as his empire turns toward the east, toward Byzantium, toward the shimmering idea of something new, one thought remains unanswered. Can an empire built by one man's memory survive the forgetfulness of history? Asterisk. The camp is quiet, not with peace, but with preparation. It is the evening of October 27th, 312 CE, and the fields north of Rome are lined with canvas tents and restless soldiers. Horses stir in their enclosures. The sky glows with torch smoke, and beneath the hush of command posts and whispered prayers, a man named Constantine walks slowly along the riverbank of the Tiber, staring into the distance toward a city that has, for centuries, defined an empire. Tomorrow, he will fight for it. The campaign had not started here. It began months earlier, when Constantine crossed the Alps with an army of uncertain size. Estimates vary from 25,000 to 40,000 men into northern Italy. A bold and dangerous move. His rival, Maxentius, held Rome. His forces outnumbered Constantine's. His walls were strong, his coffers full. But Constantine didn't rely on numbers. He relied on speed, discipline, and something stranger: a growing belief that the world was changing. As his forces swept through Italy, cities surrendered with surprising ease. Turin, Milan, Verona, places that once resisted Roman overlords, now opened their gates to Constantine's banners, some out of fear, some out of pragmatism, and some out of hope, because Constantine's war was not just for land, was for Rome itself, not the stone and senate, but the idea of what it might still become now. On this final night, before the decisive battle, Constantine does not feast. he does not boast. He does not pace the perimeter of his camp giving speeches. He withdraws. He spends part of the evening alone, just beyond the firelight, where the stars are brighter and the Tiber drifts in slow, steady currents. No records tell us what he was thinking. No scrolls capture what he whispered to the darkness. But stories survive. Some say he prayed. Others say he dreamed. In one version, preserved by Eusebius, Constantine sees a vision in the sky, a symbol shining in sunlight across, or something close to it intertwined with Greek letters Chi and Rho. The first letters of Christos. Alongside it, a message appears in Hoc Signo Vinces. In this sign, conquer. Another version says he dreamt it that night, that Christ himself appeared, told him to place the symbol on his army's shields, and promised him victory. The historical details blur. Even Constantine himself tells the story years later, not at the moment. And perhaps that's the most telling part. He chooses when and how to reveal it. What matters most may not be the vision itself, but the decision that follows. Constantine orders the symbol painted on shields, on standards, Atia, not everywhere, but in enough places that it becomes a mark of distinction. The symbol, Chi-Rho, is not yet universally understood. To some, it resembles the sun's rays. To others, it is a mystery. To the Christian soldiers in his ranks, small in number, but growing, it is a sign of protection, a moment of recognition, long overdue. And to Constantine, it is a gamble, because this battle is not just about Rome, it is about what will rule Rome next. Maxentus, meanwhile, waits behind his walls. He has made his move, destroying the Milvian bridge over the Tiber to deny Constantine access. In its place, he builds a temporary bridge of pontoons, thinking to trap Constantine should he try to cross. He positions his forces just outside the city, thinking the field gives him space to maneuver. But the citizens of Rome do not cheer him. They remember his taxes, his favors to the Praetorian Guard, his bloated rituals and empty promises. Statius calls himself Rome's son, but the people no longer feel like his children. He has temples. Constantine has momentum. As darkness deepens, Constantine returns to his command tent. He speaks little. He gives simple orders. Rations ready before sunrise. Shields checked for stability. Bridge scouts in position. Prayer allowed, but no firelight after third watch. He wants the camp quiet, focused. That night, soldiers murmur quietly among themselves. Some finger their rosary, still illegal, in theory. Others polish swords, stare into the dark, or whisper old battlefield jokes. A few sketch the strange new symbol on the inside of their helmets, unsure whether it is blessing or experiment. Some do not understand it at all. Others begin to believe in Constantine. He lies awake, not with fear, but with weight. This is not just a battle for territory. It is a threshold. If he wins, he becomes the first emperor to rule with open Christian favor. If he loses, he becomes another, name scratched from a ruined column. He does not claim to be chosen. Not yet, but he knows that something has changed. He has watched the world shift, watched soldiers pray to different gods in the same trench, watched bishops exiled and return again, watched the palaces of power drift away from Rome toward somewhere else. And now, in the final hours before the Milvian bridge, he prepares to cross more than just a river. He prepares to cross a line in history. The stars shift. Cold wind moves through the camp. Somewhere downriver, the pontoons groan against their moorings, and Constantine sleeps sore, perhaps only pretends to sleep, because tomorrow the world will remember. But what exactly will unfold on the battlefield? Will the sign hold? Will the river betray or bless? And how do you fight a war, not just with swords, but with symbols? Asterisk at first light. The river mists still cling to the ground. The Tiber, wide and slow, reflects a sky of soft gray clouds. Birds cut across it silently. There are no trumpets, no declarations. It's the muted rhythm of soldiers rising from sleep. The morning of October 28th, 312 CE, begins with discipline. Constantine's army veterans of the Rhine, of the Danube, of Galisimbo with quiet efficiency. They tighten saddle straps, sharpen blades, check the leather loops that hold their pillar. On some of their shields, a new symbol gleams faintly in the damp air. The Chi-Rho, brushed in white paint, an emblem not of Rome's old gods, but something new, something whispered. Some touch it before marching, some say nothing. Queven marked nuns scrape it off. Across the field, beyond a shallow rise, lies the army of Maxentus. Larger, yes, better supplied, but not as unified. Many of his men were conscripted quickly, some coerced, others bribed. He still commands the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite inner defenders, but even they have grown suspicious, more loyal to their own survival than to their emperor's dreams. And Maxentus, he has left the city. He could have waited behind the walls of Rome, where Constantine would have faced siege, warfare, starvation, or stalemate. But he doesn't. Instead, he meets Constantine in open battle outside the Milvian Bridge, choosing the field over fortification. Perhaps it is pride, perhaps prophecy, or perhaps, as some sources suggest, he had consulted oracles who told him the enemy of Rome will perish today. He assumed that meant Constantine. The field itself is narrow. The Tiber forms a natural boundary on the right. On the left, low marshland. Constantine has no room to maneuver large flanks. But he doesn't need to. His forces are smaller, but tighter, more experienced, and most critically calmer. They've been moving for weeks. They've fought city to city. They've won Maxentus's men. They've waited now. They've faced the kind of army that doesn't hesitate. Constantine leads the vanguard personally. He is not in a palanquin. He is not on a platform. He is on horseback, armored, visible, with his cloak drawn tight and his helm tucked beneath his arm, when his cavalry aligned behind him. They do so not because of ceremony, but because they've followed him before. The sun breaks through the mist, just enough to cast long shadows over the field. He raises his sword. The battle begins. It is not an elegant clash. There are no sweeping cavalry maneuvers, no dazzling surprises. There is mud, there is confusion. Horses buck, spheres snap. The pontoon bridge that Maxentus had built designed as a trap now becomes a bottleneck as Constantine presses forward. Maxentus's forces try to retreat across it, but too many men, too fast. The river Belocum, just hours ago, begins to churn. The bridge collapses, and with it, order vanishes. Constantine holds position. He doesn't overextend. He lets Maxentus's disarray unravel the battle. His infantry holds tight. His flanks reinforce. His cavalry pierces through the gaps. All across the field, cries rise and fall like waves. Men shout in Latin and Greek. Some scream the names of gods, others for their mothers. Some simply fall without a sound. Trampled in the rush. Maxentus is seen shouting orders, then disappearing. Moments later, his body is found in the river, drowned, heavy in his armor, dragged down by the weight of insignia and lost fortune. His body, bloated and bruised, is later fished from the Tiber and paraded by Constantine's men not as a humiliation, but as proof the usurper is dead. The field is silent by late afternoon. Smoke hangs low. Crows circle high. Constantine does not gloat. He walks the edge of the river, gazing down at the wreckage of the pontoon bridge, twisted timbers, tangled ropes, lost men floating. He does not smile. He simply nods. Rome waits. Its citizens, is uncertain, listen for the sound of war drums. They hear instead the measured footsteps of an army not looting, but organizing. Constantine enters the city slowly, deliberately. There are no fires, no sack, no revenge. He goes first to the Senate, then to the Forum, then, unexpectedly, to the Christian clergy, many of whom had lived quietly under Maxentus, tolerated but watched. He offers them recognition, freedom to worship, property returned, leaders restored. It is not yet empire-wide policy, but it is a signal, a message that the world has turned. And yet, amid all this, Constantine still does not declare himself Christian, not publicly. He still coins money with Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. He still attends Roman rituals. He still plays both sides, but the soldiers remember the symbol on their shields. The bishops remember his promises, and the people begin to whisper. The empire has a new guardian. The Milvian Bridge is never rebuilt as it was, not in Constantine's time, but its meaning lingers, because that river crossing muddy, narrow, chaotic, becomes the hinge of something far larger than a single battle. It becomes the moment when Roman tradition and Christian future meet, not peacefully, not clearly, but permanently. And still the question drifts through the smoke. Did Constantine win because of the sign? Nor did the sign survive because Constantine won. The morning after the battle, the air above the Tiber hangs heavy with the scent of broken wood, wet leather, and iron rusting in silence. The battlefield is still not with calm, but with aftermath. Bodies lie where they fell, some face down, in the shallow water, others caught in reeds or tangled in the remains of Maxentus's collapsed bridge. The makeshift pontoons, built in haste and meant to trap an enemy, have instead swallowed the retreating army that once claimed to be Rome's last hope. And now Constantine stands on its banks, no longer just a general or even a claimant, but a victor and soon emperor. He does not enter Rome with fireworks, no wild procession, no chariots, no golden laurels. Instead, he walks behind his standard, the Labarum, as it will later be called, tall pole topped with the Chi-Rho symbol, flanked by a wreath and inscribed with the phrase in this sign, "Conquer." The citizens of Rome do not cheer wildly. They watch and sure, cautious. Many had once welcomed Maxentus. Many more had simply survived him. Now they look on the man who defeated him and wonder, what kind of ruler will this be? Constantine does not punish the Senate. He doesn't plunder temples. He doesn't execute former officials. Instead, he issues a general pardon, a deliberate choice, not out of mercy alone, but strategy. Rome has had enough blood in its gutters. In the days following the victory, Constantine begins laying administrative roots. Bishops are released from exile. Confiscated church properties are quietly returned. A special tax exemption is granted to the Christian clergy in Rome. The imperial seal begins appearing on letters written to Christian leaders, not to command, but to consult. And most importantly, a shift begins, one as subtle as it is powerful. The language of power begins to change. In his public inscriptions, Constantine no longer invokes Jupiter as protector of the emperor. Instead, he begins using Deus, God, without specifying a pantheon. It is a term broad enough to mean everything, and yet just specific enough to mean the God of the Christians. The move is deliberate. It allows traditional Romans to imagine he still honors their gods, while signaling to the growing Christian population that their emperor now favors their God. It is policy by ambiguity, and Constantine excels at it. But the change is not only spiritual, it is structural. The Praetorian Guard, the elite military unit that had supported Maxentus and manipulated emperors for decades, says dismantled, not gradually, completely. Their barracks are emptied, their privileges revoked, their command broken. Rome's most infamous kingmakers are no more in their place. Constantine begins constructing a new imperial bodyguard, one loyal only to him, drawn from the frontiers, from the provinces, not the palace elite. Men who served him in Gaul. Men who crossed the Alps. Men who watched the sun rise over the Milvian bridge and followed him anyway in the months after the battle. Constantine remains in Rome only briefly. He does not treat the city as his home. It is symbolic, grand, ancient, but it is not where his empire lives. His heart is already quanned elsewhere, toward the Balkans, toward the Bosporus, toward a new capital, not yet fully imagined, but already taking shape in his mind. Because Rome, for all its history, is also a trap. Its politics, its debts, its ghosts. Constantine respects it, but he would not depend on it. And so, he begins moving. Not armies, but institutions. Treasury offices are transferred to Milan. Military command shifts toward the Danube. Roads are remarked with new milestones bearing, not SPQR, but his name. It is not loud, it is not rushed, but it is constant. A quiet revolution carried out by bureaucrats, not banners. He also writes 2 bishops in Carthage, in Syria, in Alexandria. He tells them the age of persecution is over. He encourages them to gather, to resolve doctrinal disputes peacefully. He funds church repairs, donates gold plate for liturgies, and when conflict arises between rival bishops, he steps in to mediate. This is not simply tolerance. It is the beginning of involvement. But Constantine still waits to be baptized. He still issues coins with Sol Invictus. He still celebrates Roman holidays. He is not in a hurry to declare, because he understands religion is not yet a personal matter for an emperor. It is a state tool, and like any good tool, it must be handled with timing. And yet, the memory of that night, the vision or dream or symbol follows him. It appears on coins, on armor, on flags. It becomes his brand, his legend, his shield, and it spreads through soldiers, stories, through bishops' letters, through whispers that the emperor now fights under the god of the oppressed. The Milvian bridge itself, broken and unused, soon becomes a marker, not of infrastructure, but of meaning. It is remembered not as an engineering failure, but as the site where history turned, where one man crossed a river carrying more than an army. He carried a symbol, and the world has never forgotten it. So, as Constantine rides east toward a new city, toward more reforms, toward deeper conflict, he carries with him a memory, a night of silence, a sky filled with stars, a decision made beside the Tiber, beneath a vision, beneath the weight of centuries, and a question that no battle can answer. Did he choose the sign, or did the sign choose him? Asterisk. It begins with a symbol, 2 Greek letters, Chi and Rho fuse at the stem. Unfamiliar to many, sacred to some, painted not on temple walls or marble statues, but on shields, helmets, banners, canas. The shape is new, but the effect is immediate. It makes men whisper. Not just soldiers, but clerks, governors, midwives, sailors along the Tiber. It marks a moment, or perhaps it marks a turning, because the empire once a vessel for gods, with golden helmets and thunderbolts, has begun to speak in different shapes. The Chi-Rho, as it comes to be known, is not introduced with proclamations or decrees. It first appears quietly, like a river changing course, on Constantine's standard, on seals, on official correspondence, then on stone, then on coinage, and beneath it, often in Latin, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. The words echo back to the night before the battle of the Milvian bridge. But now, in the months that follow, the phrase begins to multiply, painted on gateways into cities that once resisted him, etched into stone monuments commemorating victory. Sung in chants by Christians in far-off provinces. In this sign, you will conquer. But what sign? And what does it mean to conquer? For some, it's a miracle, the first time a Roman emperor has acknowledged the Christian God not as a threat, but as a protector. God, not a secret meetings in underground catacombs, but a public endorsement. A God, finally, who speaks from the top of the imperial hierarchy. For others, it's a danger. Senators grumble, pagan priests worry. The temples of Jupiter, Mars, and Apollo still stand, but fewer processions visit. Fewer sacrifices are offered. Public funds begin to flow elsewhere. Temples go dark in the provinces. This change travels not as law, but as rumor. In Gaul, farmers report seeing soldiers wearing crossed letters on their tunics. In Africa, bishops receive unexpected donations from the emperor in Asia Minor. Spread that Constantine now refuses to offer incense at altars to Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, and in the east, under Licinius, still compara, for now tensions grow, cause Licinius tolerates Christians, apologist, and he watches Constantine's rise, not with admiration, but with unease. He knows the empire is splitting again, not at the Danube, not at the Euphrates, but at the soul, back in Rome. Constantine builds his Arch of Triumph. It is a grand structure still, standing today, built not far from the Colosseum. It celebrates his victory over Maxentius. But what's remarkable is not what it includes, it's what it leaves out. There are no pagan gods carved into the reliefs. No Jupiter, no Mars, no Minerva. Instead, there are images of Constantine himself, guided by something ambiguous. The sun, providence. The Christian God, the stone, doesn't say. It merely suggests, because Constantine is still doing what he has always done best, balancing. He issues edicts favoring Christians, but doesn't outlaw other beliefs. He returns church property, but funds civic temples too. They serve the people. He praises bishops, but still speaks the language of old Roman law. He never declares, I am Christian. Not yet, but he allows the symbol, the Chi-Rho, become imperial language. Not a confession, not a prayer, but a brand. In the marketplaces, the symbol appears on coins, first subtly, then boldly. A small mark near the emperor's foot, then at the top of the standard, then replacing the older gods entirely. Gold Solidus coins, once stamped with Sol Invictus, now carry the strange Christian emblem. Merchants don't care what it means. They care that it's official, and in this way, the battle is won again and again. Not on rivers, not on bridges, but in symbols, in policy, in the careful rethreading of Roman identity. At the heart of it all is a riddle. Did Constantine believe the sign gave him victory? Or did he believe victory made the sign true? No one knows. Perhaps not even he. But the effect is irreversible, because an empire that once stretched from Hadrian's wall to the Red Sea now stretches from ritual to doctrine, from shrine to sermon. In this sign, he conquers, and the empire bends not through force, but through symbolism. But the world does not change without resistance, and soon, Constantine's compere Licinius, still clinging to old gods and old politics, will push back, and, when he does, the symbol will not be enough. There will be another war, another river, another reckoning. But how far can a symbol travel before it demands blood again? And what happens when two emperors carry different gods into the same battlefield? The empire is quiet, but only for a moment. After the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine rules the Western Roman Empire, and Licinius rules the East. Together, they signed the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, document now etched in textbooks as a turning point for religious freedom in Rome. On parchment, it is simple: let every man have the freedom to worship whichever god he chooses. But what seems like tolerance is, beneath the ink, a calculated pause. Constantine uses the edict to to extend legitimacy to Christianity. Licinius signs it too, but without conviction. He sees Christianity not as a rising order, but as a disruption, something to manage, something that might fade. The truth is, neither man trusts the other for nearly a decade. They maintain the illusion of harmony. Constantine governs from the west, making Milan and Trier centers of power. Licinius governs from Nicomedia, foreseeing the east's wealthy cities Antioch, Alexandria, Gondium. Each sends letters, coins, troops, each watches the other, and between them lies a fragile line like a crack in stone, spreading so slowly most don't see it at first. That line finally breaks in 316 CE. A border skirmish between their governors along the Danube sparks conflict. Licinius accuses Constantine of encroachment. Constantine demands redress. Words escalate. Legions move. And the empire, once again, divides not just between rulers, but between visions. Constantine marches east. He does not rush. He prepares. His army is not just soldiers, it's engineers, scribes, supply trains, banners. And this time, his men do not just carry swords. They carry the Chi-Rho. The sign is no longer just a symbol. It is now a banner mounted on the Imperial Labarum, a tall, jeweled staff crowned with the crossed letters, flanked by a wreath of victory. It is raised not only on battlefields, but at city gates. Everywhere it goes, the people understand this army serves a different god. Licinius answers with his own preparations. He reinforces Byzantium, his strategic base on the PORs. He arms his navy, guarding the straits between Europe and Asia, and in his proclamations, he removes Christian influence. He dismisses Christian officers, closes churches, burns a few publicly. Not enough to call it persecution, but enough to make a point. The war between Constantine and Licinius is not just a civil war, it is a clash of frameworks. West versus East, new symbols versus old rites, a cross versus the gods of stone and sky. In 324 CE, it finally erupts. The decisive confrontation comes at Chrysopolis, across from Byzantium. Licinius holds the high ground, his legions stretched across the coast. His navy is strong, his position fortified. But Constantine's army has something else, cohesion and belief. His soldiers have followed him from the Alps to Rome, from Rome to the Danube. Many are now second generation under his banners. They fight not just for pay or land, but for what he represents. When Constantine gives orders, they are followed not with obedience, but with confidence. They believe he wins. On the morning of battle, Constantine assembles his men beneath the Labarum. He tells them the sign they carry is no longer just a mark. It is a covenant that the God who gave them victory at the Tiber will now give them the East, and they believe it. The battle is swift. Licinius's formations falter under Constantine's cavalry. By noon, the eastern lines collapse. Licinius flees to Byzantium, then to Nicomedia. A few weeks later, he surrenders. Constantine offers him a pardon under one condition: retirement. Licinius accepts. But soon after, rumors of conspiracy rise. Constantine accuses him of plotting a return. And quietly, with no spectacle, Licinius is executed. There are no protests, because the empire is now one again, and it belongs to Constantine alone. He does not celebrate wildly. He doesn't march on temples. He doesn't rename cities overnight. He builds slowly. He reforms provincial boundaries, making governance more manageable. He restructures the military command, ensuring no future general could rise without his knowing. He begins to shift the capital from Rome to Byzantium, where East and West can be watched together. And he names the city not after a god or a republic, but after himself, Constantinople. The battle that began with a sign has ended with an empire remade. The gods of Rome are not yet outlawed, but their time is slipping. The Christians, once hunted in catacombs, now walk through palaces, and Constantine, once a soldier in another man's court, now builds courts of his own line with men who wear the cross on their chests. And still, the symbol remains, carved in stone, etched in gold, worn in battle, the Chi-Rho. In this sign, conquer. But as the empire moves into its next era, a harder question begins to form. Now that the sign has conquered, can it rule? Asterisk. The war is over. The rivers are calm again. The borders still. And across the vast stretch of the reunited Roman Empire, from the misty hills of Britannia to the hot stones of Palestine, there is a new stillness. Not peace exactly, but settlement, a realignment. Like a forest after a storm, it's heavy with broken branches and reshaped light. Constantine is now the sole emperor of Rome, and that has not happened in over a generation. But what he inherits is no longer the Rome of Cicero or Augustus or even Diocletian. It is something more fragmented, more brittle, and more in need of a vision. Constantine knows this, and so he does not rest the empire he builds after Chrysopolis. Constantine begins a quiet reconstruction, not with fanfare, but with documents, architects, and roads. He redraws provincial lines to prevent any single governor from growing too powerful. He increases the number of dioceses, fragments, command structures, and ensures no army can rise without his consent. He standardizes the gold Solidus, a stablecoin that will outlast the empire itself. Surviving nearly 1,000 years, he builds basilicas in Rome and Tria in Jerusalem. Some are civic, some are religious, some are both. He funds charities, granaries, and schools. But at the center of every project is control, not tyranny, not chaos, but Constantine's version of order. An order that carries a sinus shape painted on banners, etched in gold, carved into a RCHWAYS dot, the Chi-Rho. The religion he reframes in 325 CE. Constantine summons bishops from across the empire to meet in Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea. It is not a military event. It is not a conquest. It is a meeting of belief, because while Constantine has allowed Christianity to flourish, it is not yet unified. Doctrinal disputes simmer. Debates over Christ's nature, the Trinity, the date of Easter all threaten to split this new power he has tethered to his rule. So he brings them together. Over 300 bishops attend. They travel from every part of the Roman world, many still bearing the scars of persecution under Diocletian and earlier emperors. And Constantine, the former outsider, the unbaptized emperor, presides over it all. He doesn't dictate doctrine, but he guides discussion, funds the travel, provides security. He makes unity a political goal. From this council comes the Nicene Creed, a declaration of belief that still echoes through churches today. From this moment, Christianity is no longer just legal. It is imperial. It has entered the state. It has begun to wear the crown. The legacy he shapes as the years pass. Constantine continues to build not only infrastructure, but identity. He constructs Constantinople not merely as a new capital, but as a new Rome, not weighed down by senates and shrines, but open to bureaucracy, trade, theological councils. He fills it with monument statues taken from across the empire, repurposed and placed in new plazas, given new meanings. At the center of the new city stands the Column of Constantine. Upon it, a statue of the emperor himself, dressed not in a Roman toga, but in the robes of Apollo, a sun crown on his head, holding a spear and orb. It is a mixture of symbols, Roman, pagan, Christian, because Constantine is still not yet baptized. Not publicly. The death that waits it is only on his deathbed in 337 CE that Constantine finally receives baptism. By then, his reign has lasted more than 30 years. He has fought civil wars, built cities, presided over councils, and transformed Christianity from hunted cult to imperial language. Why did he wait? No one knows for certain. Some say it was to cleanse all sins at once. His baptism was then believed to wash all prior guilt. Others say he always remained in between, never fully Christian, never fully pagan, always both. But when he dies, he is wrapped in white robes. He is buried not in Rome, but in Constantinople, in a church he commissioned, among 12 empty sarcophagi to represent the 12 apostles, and in the center, his own tomb, a symbolic 13th apostle. The empire that follows the legacy Constantine leaves behind is not clean. His sons fight each other for power. The empire fractures. Again and again, Christianity splinters. Rome eternal and unbending falls a century later. But the symbol remains. The Chi-Rho, the sign, the memory of a man who saw something in the sky real, or imagined it, believed it meant destiny. He painted it on shields, carried it into battles, built cities beneath it, governed with it, and in doing so, he bent an empire around it. Because, in the end, perhaps, he was right. Some signs do not just mark history, they make it. Asterisk.